Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to our conversation. I'm Colm. I'm the youth ministry coordinator here at St. Anne's Parish in Saskatoon. And with me, per usual,
I'm Father Matthew. I'm the pastor here at St. Anne's.
well, good friend. Usually we plan our banter, but we didn't even plan our banter this time. So, yeah. Anything happening? What's kicking? I know we're intense into like liturgical scheduling.
Yeah, if everyone wants to hear about how exciting that is. But I guess we're trying to figure out how to do the Easter weekend well with the rules we're in. But then we got the news that is both good and also throwing us off a little bit. Is it sounds like Scott Moe was saying yesterday, there's a possibility of beginning to open up a little bit more as our case numbers go down. So the first really good news is that our case numbers are going down, vaccinations going up. And then with that, there's a possibility of some of these rules relaxing things, opening up a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't
Especially
know
after
if
my little rant I gave on the weekend about the rules of the churches.
maybe it made a difference.
I do not think it did.
I definitely know some more people have been contacting MLAs and that kind of stuff, which is good. And it was very funny. I caught a little bit of it yesterday, and I was like, this is very much is like Kevin Feige teasing MCU, like a little carrot dangling. Yeah. Like, I was like, I live in great hope and expectation, but yeah, it is a little hard to plan when we're not totally sure where we're going to be. But anyway, that's fun. It's beautiful out, which is
also nice.
That's been really nice. Kids getting a lot of snow time, and yeah, it's really.
I shelled off my back deck yesterday, and there was some heavy wet snow. I only got about a quarter of the way done, but it's coming.
There you go.
So hopefully it'll melt that much sooner. I can get out there before too long.
Be sitting on the deck,
Oh yeah, got a little heater I can use.
Do you have a little portable heater?
Yeah, a little outdoor heater.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we're not that fancy over there. Well, I have a fire pit, but I shouldn't put that on my deck. Apparently, that's not really
not a good idea.
Not a good idea. But we're excited to continue, I guess, second Sunday of Lent. Mm-hmm. We're, diving into this, I guess, is a series on freedom.
It's kind of a theme. Yeah, it's not a
theme, maybe not a formal series, but yeah, it was exciting. I don't know if we just want to jump into it.
Sure, yeah. And I guess where this came from, this idea of building freedom, is really as I was praying over my Ash Wednesday homilies. And the first Ash Wednesday masses I gave were actually to the students in the high school. And then it went on to our Ash Wednesday and on from there. But yeah, the idea of that what we do in Lent, these disciplines are all about building freedom in us. I've been kind of dancing around that theme, and I'll keep on doing that throughout Lent. And maybe to start off, though, there's a story that I came across. I shared in the homily I wanted to talk about here. To me, it is a great example of a man living Christian freedom and being free of all those sorts of things that stop us from doing what's right. So you can take a really heroic stand. And that's a guy named Franz Jägerstrater. And first, the way I found out about this homily, or this guy, was some time ago. I was on vacation. And one thing I find interesting when I'm on vacation as a priest is to go to a different church, of course. And it's not often I get to hear someone else preach. So I hear another priest give a homily, see how they do, what they do.
You bring your report card and you judge them. He goes looking for ideas and to be fed.
I'm always really uncomfortable preaching in front of other priests, so I know I'm doing the same to them as well.
Yeah.
But this priest did that when I was on vacation. In his homily, he mentioned this guy, Franz Jägerstrater. And so I just first heard about this guy just from another priest's homily. But just a reminder who he was. He was born in Austria in the early 1900s, worked as a farmer, as a laborer, lived in a village, so not a wealthy guy. And he ended his life executed by the Nazis. And that's because they tried to draft him into the Nazi army, and he refused to do it. And even though, to me, a really disappointing part of the story is that he had a priest come and try to tell him, at this point, Franz was in prison for refusing to fight for the Nazis. And a priest came and tried to tell him, fight for them, don't do this. And even at one point before this, he went to his bishop to say, we need to take a stronger stand against what the Nazis are doing. And I don't know all the details, but it sounds like the bishop just, for whatever reason, wasn't willing to, or maybe had his own reasons not to. But he also found out about another priest, Franz Reisnick, who was also executed by the Nazis for refusing to support them. And so that was the good example that Franz was leaning on. But yeah, he refused to fight in the Nazi army, was imprisoned, and was ultimately executed by the Nazis for refusing to fight for them.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that story, and I'm glad you shared how you found out about it. I was like, does Father Matt in his spare time just Wikipedia be odd, obscure martyrs, that are uncommon? And but it is interesting, right? Of when you present this idea of freedom, or we'll talk a little bit. Well, the last 2 months a little bit about virtue, of this was heroic virtue, but in the eyes of the world, kind of an unsuccessful life, in many ways true. Of how we kind of paint it. And and almost like a forgotten life,
Yeah.
as you talked about, even like the family almost and the community being a bit ashamed of
Yeah,
him for
so
a
what I
while.
had read about this, and this is online stuff, I haven't verified all of it, so I didn't quite get in the homily, but it seems to be well sourced. But that, so after the war, first of all, his village didn't want to put his name on the war memorial at first to the war dead. And also his wife at first didn't get the pension from being the wife of someone who died in the war. But now I guess he has. And it was in just 2007, Pope Benedict declared him a martyr. So he was killed in 1943. And it took time, for the story to even be well known, but clearly being recognized now. So in 2007, Pope Benedict declared him a martyr and also a blessed, which is one step away from being a saint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a very unique, interesting story. And I think it was just an encouragement a little bit to my own heart of, you can live a heroic, virtuous life and an unknown life, but still glorious, and holy and good and filled with purpose. Yeah. Even if the world doesn't recognize it, or at least for a very long time.
For a long time, that's right. And that's a good point too. I hadn't thought of, like you said, that it was in some ways unsuccessful in that, like, it didn't stop the war. He didn't stop what was happening. But it was successful in that he did the right thing. He made the love decision, the freedom decision, the faithful decision. And definitely now an inspiration to people as well, I think.
Yeah, and also knowing that our witness and our example is for those around us, but generations to come, right? Like who, as we, in our tradition as Catholics, with the intercession of the saints and miracles that lead to the sainthood of like who is he interceding on, in this behalf, and like that stuff I find remarkable, right?
And he's the patron saint of conscientious objectors, which I found interesting because that's what he was killed for being, really.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a good deep dive there. Yeah. Add it to our little list of patron saints.
Absolutely.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. I might go to, as he wasn't even a Catholic, but I think of, what's the movie with who was Andrew Garfield? He wasn't Catholic, but whenever I think of conscious objector, I go to
I don't know.
Hacksaw Ridge. Isn't
okay.
I was like, I go to that guy. I was like, well, isn't he? He was
Quaker.
He was a Quaker. I think.
Yeah.
He wasn't Catholic, but. Anyways, good to know who the Catholic patron is.
Yeah, there you go. He's a great example too. Whoever Andrew Garfield played.
I forget that guy's name, but
I haven't seen the movie actually.
That's also a great story. Yeah,
but the reason I shared this is I've been trying to find a way to how do you paint the picture of Christian freedom, because in some ways, at least, I kind of feel when you first look at it, it seems very different from what the world means by freedom. But then I think as you push through that and really understand it, you see the beauty of this idea of Christian freedom. And I guess the way that the world, I would think, talks about freedom is doing whatever you want, like not having rules, not having restrictions.
Yeah.
So you see that as could you relate to that?
For sure.
Worldly view of freedom?
I'm raising, I guess a preteen, and her desire for less restrictions and more freedom and going. I mean, I work with teenagers and, people that work with teens, but it's interesting. And years ago, is it Dr. Meg Meeker? Anyways, a parenting book, and was talking about this idea that, boundaries actually are a sign of love and care.
Oh yeah.
And so when they're pushing, sometimes, in development, teens actually want to know that there's boundaries there because it shows that you still have care and concern.
Oh, okay.
So there is this interesting where we talk about give people their space, give them their freedom. In some ways, it's showing a lack of kind of care or concern, right? To say, well, no limits, do what you want.
Yeah.
To say, well, no, I care about my son Killian, that he doesn't have limits. Like you can't just run off the stairs because I know that's not good for you.
You're limiting his freedom by putting up the baby gate.
I'm such a jerk, But I sometimes I go back to that reference a lot in terms of how the world sometimes presents freedom or in our desire for it, and kind of the Christian understanding of it as we'll dive into kind of those three parts of like that framework, and even the development of my understanding of freedom in my own life is. Although I live a much more rule-based, duty-based, structured life than maybe the 12-year-old in me ever desired to do in my late 30s, I think I'm more free than my 12-year-old's understanding of what I could have been as an adult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And part of it too, I think, Oh, I think I lost where I was going with this now. That's great. But when you're talking about, oh, right, how restrictions or like boundaries being a sign of love. And it's not as loving to just if you're going to use your own children, for example, let them run wild, do whatever they want. Like that's going to be probably harmful and dangerous in various ways. And I guess what I think where I was going with that is part of, I guess, what's a step beyond this view of Christian freedom is really the idea of objective truth and objective goodness. And it does make sense, I guess, that if good is just whatever is good for you, and if truth is just whatever is true for you, then there's not really any good boundaries on freedom. But if there is an objective good, not objective truth, then we see, oh yeah, if we had some guardrails protecting us from going too far astray from that and directing us to that and allowing us to live for that good, that's where we get to the idea of what Christian freedom is guidance toward the objective good.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking we were going to go to, relativism and objective truth, but it makes sense. If we don't have kind of a common understanding or belief in that, then yeah, these rules, it seems
arbitrary.
It seems arbitrary and nonsense, right? And that is often sometimes when people, in my own life, again, work with teens or in families of like where there's objections to rules or structures, it's often of like, well, that just seems like arbitrary. Doesn't make sense, right?
It's not fair.
And so I've even learned of like, even with children sometimes of like, I'm still the parent, you're still the kid. Some things are just the way they are. But sometimes when I give the undertone of like, this is why we do things, right? And we don't have to give all the reasons, but when there's a sense of where this comes from, there's a objective truth or a purpose of what we're trying to achieve as a family. Generally, those rules are received a bit better as opposed to when it's just
this is it.
This is the way of things.
Absolutely.
That there's a truth. There's something that there's the guardrails, as you kind of say.
And that's where maybe like this is a parallel, I guess. Like one way where I think the world does definitely see objective truth is in terms of like physical health, in the sense of no one is going to argue that not falling down the stairs is equally good to falling down the stairs, right? We're going to say, oh yeah, falling down the stairs is objectively not a good thing for a child to do. So in terms of health and safety, there's maybe more shared understanding there. But when it comes to the purpose of life and morality and goodness, that's where there's more debate.
Yeah. And it's as much as I think there is a sense of truth and goodness in society, even though we're in a very post-Christian world, there's still a lot of remnants of our value system, right? That is there. And we've talked about this a few times, maybe in coffee, or I don't know if it's been at the conversation of, I think in a weird way, COVID has helped a little bit. I think
we're going there too.
I think Christian values of the sense of truth, of the care of neighbor, this kind of, I think some of that has been heightened, right? And so it's how well do we lean into that, right? Is kind of the next steps of that is maybe the challenge. But it is also, I've had conversations with people too of understanding to say, not everybody views the purpose of life and their understanding of freedom is not always the same. Yeah. And it's good to start to have conversations with people of like, where are they coming from? Like, what is the value? What is the truth that they're, kind of building their life off of. Right.
Right.
And I tell my kids of like God, like Jesus is the source and the center of our life. And like our decisions flow from that. Yeah. Including the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where another key thing I think we're getting on here is the idea that even if we are at the level of just having to know the rules, and we'll see in a moment, that's sort of the first step in Christian moral teaching is the rules. Exactly. But yeah, if we don't see the reasons behind them, that's where it's aggravating. And I'm just thinking as we talk about this, like, it's hard to just not think about the COVID rules we're facing now. And it is true that, like, if we don't see the reasons behind them, it's a lot easier to get angry about them, right? But if we understand the need, then it's easier to follow them. Not to get into all of that now, but we're experiencing a lot of these issue of law and freedom and reason and restriction in a really heavy way this past year.
Yeah. I mean, not that we're trying to have, rant 2.0 or anything, but that is a tension, right? And when there is, I think there's place for disagreements or debate, but it's still the understanding, even, a lot of conversation, obviously, about, attendance at mass and all this stuff is going on. But I saw from quite a few yourself, and sharing kind of what the bishop's letter and, on the weekend. And I think Father Darrell had shared a thing too. And it's like, we will do what we need to do to keep people safe. Like
Yeah,
we see that
absolutely.
as that truth,
Yeah.
right? Is that care of neighbor and love, like that's a Christian value. We're not setting that aside,
Yeah.
and it really takes, going from that idea of duty, but there's more to freedom than just that, right?
Yeah.
Is leading into this idea of virtue, and I have to translate into like my daily walk, with God and my family, of like how free am I in how I love and how I converse and how well I do my work. That's where I get caught up a lot.
Yeah.
I think of a lot of us maybe get past that duty, that kind of the base rule stage. We either do it and we're okay with it, and we know the reasons, or we choose not to and we're okay with that too.
Yeah.
I think it's those last two stages where it
Well, let's walk
gets
through
a bit
those
dicey,
through the three then. Yeah. So I did also lay out here these three stages of kind of the Christian moral life. And it was duty first, and then virtue, and then mature freedom or Christian freedom. And yes, the level of duty, like you had mentioned, is really knowing the rules and following the rules. And the point I did want to make with that is we're not downplaying the rules. Like, we need to know right and wrong. Like the 10 Commandments, teaching of the church, all that is the foundation. But my concern with it is sometimes we don't go beyond that in terms of our teaching of the faith. And well, those are the rules, and that's what we do, or that's what we don't do, and that's it. But this is just the foundation. And so with this Franz, again, this example we began with, like, he had that, he knew what was right, and he did it. So we always need to keep that. But then sometimes it happens that we know what's right, but we also don't do it. And that's why we take these further steps. And so the second step, like you mentioned, is virtue. And you talked in terms of, I think, your walk with Christ, or your daily walk in faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, for me, it's like every 5 minutes,
Yeah.
I'm being faced with an obstacle. Like I just posted something before we recorded this quote from John Acuff. It was talking about resiliency is like moving forward in the absence of like courage and clarity and understanding, of like just keep moving forward, right? And like I think sometimes we keep waiting for the big obstacle or the big dose of courage that puts us through to help us do the right thing, and it's like no, like my path to heaven is like the next 5 minutes, over and over and over again. When I think in that frame, I think I'm walking faster and better.
That's really true, because it's easy sometimes. This, I think, is a danger to, like, imagine myself taking the big heroic stand when, like, everything's on the line. And in some ways, that's almost an easier thing to do, because it's a big one-time thing and you see the consequences, as opposed to loving the person in front of me, or taking those simple, quiet moments of love every step along the way.
Yeah, you're trying to egg me on to an old rant of mine, which is that I always had this desire to be like, I want to be the dude who jumps in front of a bus to save the kid, because it's like instant path of martyrdom. It's just like it can happen. But it's, in some ways, as much as that is hard and heroic, and it is all those things, it's also easy in a certain way. Like when I was thinking that when I was younger, and I still catch myself in those moments, it's because it's almost escapism for me to get myself thinking those languages, because I don't want to reflect on the reality that I committed to reading with my daughter every day during Lent, and I haven't done it every day so far. I've been doing okay, but I've missed a couple, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to look at those daily little failures. I'm going to hold out hope that I'm going to do the one great thing.
And I would say it's easy to imagine myself doing those things. I don't think it's easy to do it in the moment, but to live in that sort of fantasy of my sainthood.
Exactly.
Easier.
Yeah. The future great thing I will do.
Yeah. So then what about, we're kind of getting around this, but to me, the issue of so step one, duty, step two, virtue. Virtue is really building these capabilities, excellences, powers, abilities to be free. But part of what that assumes, though, is like, what are the things that keep us from being free? And now it's like, what are the things that stop us from doing what is right, that hold us back from fulfilling our duties? The list I gave here is doubts, fears, weaknesses. But I wonder if it's worth talking about, because I guess I even think for myself, like, what does hold me back?
Well, I mean, obviously,
weaknesses,
like sin.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it's both, right? Like when you said the idea of like doubt, fear, and weakness, to experience doubt or fear is not a sin. You know, that's a human experience.
Yeah. It's maybe an effective sin.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
weakness that we have.
But it's an encounter that we're all faced with. You can't sidetrack that, you know. And so I think that is very true. And I would say for me, I definitely can be crippled in periods of doubt and fear, right? And often I find that there's certain ones that just repeat. They maybe get repackaged, but it's like maybe a fear that I had as a kid or a teen, and it just comes, you know, and gets replayed over and over again, right? And you kind of catch yourself falling into that. But I know functionally in my own life, and I mean the season of Lent is there's literally there's habitual sins. You know, there's patterns in my life that very much can hold me back as well. And I think it would get into this idea of maturing freedom, at least in my life, and I'm still struggling to go forward on this. There was a big change, I think, in my life when I started to realize that just going and confessing that sin and moving on and then coming back and confessing that sin. But there was a priest who was like convinced me, and I think I've said this before. He's like, come back next time and tell me a different sin.
Okay.
You know, not that he was giving me permission to do another sin.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bigger conversation that was held there, but in the sense of like, he was trying to convince me and to show me, he's like, you have the capacity to not do this.
That freedom is possible.
Yes,
from
that freedom is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was pretty life-changing to me, you know, and I still kind of commit a lot of the same sins multiple times, right? But I started to have this belief that through the grace of God, that is possible.
And that is beautiful, because especially with these habitual sins, it can be hard even to seriously imagine life without it. Right? It's hard to imagine not giving into it again and again. It's become so habitual for us.
Yeah, and I would just on this point that I think it's also important for people who've overcome sometimes sounds like finality, like you've overcome, you know, an addiction or whatever. Like,
again.
But this idea, but sometimes you get through it. Maybe is a better understanding. You're on the kind of the main. Most of it is in the rearview mirror per se.
Right.
You know, it's still you know part of your story and going there. But I think it's important to share some of those testimonies and those witnesses. That's why I love even Source, and we hear people's stories and where they go, is to show people maybe who are living the same kind of journey. Who are at different markers, right? That can kind of be an encouragement that you can kind of get there. And as much as, I mean, we all have concupiscence. We all have the ability to sin and fall. But like, there have been habitual sins in period of my life that are no longer habitual. You know, that miracle, that grace has played out.
Absolutely. And that's a story of freedom, right? Like that's what we're talking about. And if people are having trouble kind of imagining this, just imagine not continually falling into these sins we've fallen into, or not having these same doubts and fears and weaknesses when you know what I should be doing. Like imagine the freedom to just do those things rather than to be always battling with these doubts, fears, weaknesses. And it's not an easy thing. We're not just decide, okay, I'm going to be free tomorrow. I think it is a journey of developing these virtues, receiving God's grace, going back to prayer again and again. But just to be sure that if we wonder, like, what is the moral life that God desires for us? How did God make us to be? It's not struggling to follow the rules, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, but it's being free to love and free of these things that keep us from loving.
I love that. Is, you know, the goal is not to be free for free's sake. You know, is there's a mission connected.
Because then we're back in terms of free for free's sake means like we don't know what's right, we don't know what's good. We're just sort of,
or to say I'm free. Look at you bound up in your sin and your doubts and your fears. You should be more like me. Like no, that's not good. And that's interesting. I think we were talking a little bit before of I've sometimes seen people in their journey of faith and in my own family of when we are experiencing living in true Christian freedom, I would say there's more love frankly in our lives. It doesn't mean perfect, doesn't mean that there's not sorrow, it doesn't mean there's grief, but there is more love.
Yeah.
And our capacity to love, right, is when I'm not bound up in my sin or in my own thoughts and my minds and my doubts. I'm more present,
Yeah.
and when I'm more present, I can be more attentive and loving towards my neighbor or to my daughter or my son or my coworkers.
Yeah,
whatever
absolutely.
It is.
Yeah. And so then to close, I presented three freedom prayers. And you was, I think, particularly want to mention a bit of number the second.
Yeah. The
second
prayer
the
of Saint
three.
Ignatius Loyola, who I love. I went to Loyola High School, so I mean,
Yeah.
shout out to Saint Ignatius and the Jesuits. But it was specifically your from the faith study. This is fourth. I always forget the order.
Yeah. Trust is the fourth.
But trust.
Faith study.
And I'm just going to read the prayer.
Sure,
and if people want to pray it along, great. But I just love it. Jesus, I entrust my whole life to you today. I will go anywhere you want me to go. I will do anything you want me to do. I will say anything you want me to say. Amen. I mean,
so what does that say to you, that prayer?
It's hard to put into words, but it's the first word that comes to me is it's just radical.
Yeah.
But it also it presents a reality that you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's maybe this theme. You can do it. Is I'm at the call of Christ, and I'm ready to respond. And not even that I'm ready to respond, I'm willing and I'm able to respond.
Yeah.
So it's radical in this belief that, Jesus, you go tell me to talk to that, new kid in the class, like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I can do it because you told me to do it, and there's going back to my 5 minutes to heaven type of, practicality is there's I don't know if it's urgent, but there's an immediacy to this understanding, right? That your capacity to love and your freedom to love gets played out in very practical ways.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to invite the Lord to show us the way. And this is just a very humble prayer.
Yeah. And I was struck too, even as you were praying it, that if I did not have a sense of the absolute truth and goodness of Christ, I might not see this prayer as freeing. It's something that goes, Jesus, just another boss. You have to do whatever he wants you to do. But when we see it as, it goes back to the idea of objective truth, objective goodness, love itself. If we see things in that mindset with that goal, then we see how freeing this is.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense just to prove that point of this is the prayer of the fourth study.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good point.
This is not the
Not
prayer
number
of
one.
this is not the prayer of discovery.
Yeah.
Right? Or of source, or what's three? Growth.
Yeah.
Is this is the fourth study. These are some folks who've been really pretty intentional on their walk, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because there is that undercurrent to this of you must really buy into this Jesus to be able to say this prayer.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. And I guess maybe even for me, as someone who's living for Jesus or trying to live for Jesus every day, and giving my life to him and my work is that's a really good examine for me. Is can I pray this prayer honestly, today or right now? And if I'm being real, some days I'm.
And in what areas do I need it, and what areas do I not quite mean it yet? Yeah, that's a great examination.
Yeah, totally, for sure.
And I wanted to for those anyone listening to this who thinks I still don't see how that's freedom. Imagine if you were to say instead I will do whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is loving, whatever is beautiful. That's what I want to fill my life with. That's the Christian freedom we're talking about, and we just know we find that in Christ.
Yeah. And that might be, sometimes it's that question of well, who is that Jesus that you're praying to, that you believe in, right? And that's Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and all good and love and beauty, right? And
we found that to be true.
And I found that to be true, and that's played out in my life, and I want it to play out the rest of my life, And I think of when I put a complete and holy abandonment to God first, that plays out better in my marriage. That plays out better in my family and in my job. That's just my story, and there's a good friend of our family where they had a bit of a conversion, and yeah, they had this conversation with their family, and they said like, yeah,
Yeah.
you know, our abandonment to Jesus has put our family in a different space. And I don't mean like tangible, they didn't have more money, that I have no idea, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But when they went back to this idea of like, yeah, we are, you know, maybe a better, fuller, you know, more loving version of ourselves, and as a family, you know, when we put God
Yeah.
first. And that witness, when they kind of shared that story to my wife and I don't think we were married yet, but like really kind of just marked us,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I think maybe that time about last week of like, I'm not ashamed to say I'm a Jesus freak,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because I know what life in Christ has given me. You know, you know, when you have a sense, when you experience true freedom in Christ, I realized how not free I am when I'm not with Christ.
Yeah. That's true. And I think that's the key point is like we proclaim this to be freedom because we've lived it and we've not lived it. And we found that living it is freedom. Like that's the story. That's the reality we've lived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's just the, you know, a wrap up point for me is it's a free choice,
Mm-hmm.
and it plays out every moment. You know, how I'm going to live the rest of this day, how I'm going to live. Maybe your first 2 weeks of Lent were a little rocky, not perfect. Welcome to my world.
Yeah. Yep.
But we have a couple more weeks. You know,
Yeah.
you know, what decision are we going to make? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm excited to continue this journey of freedom.
Yeah. Me too. Amen.
Any parting shots or challenges or anything you want to throw down?
No, just I like your party challenge. If your Lent so far has not been what you wanted it to be, then you've got a few weeks left. Like make it what you want it to be. Yeah, keep living it out that way.
There you go.
Yeah.
God is beckoning you every day, every moment. Have the courage to say yes. We will see you next week. Take good care, and we'll see you soon.
Amen.
Bye.